thanks again for helping me with this. Like a fun.
Oh, anytime. It's actually kind of fun. Plus, you owe me pizza.
I don't remember exactly when it started. Maybe I was 6 or 7. But even now, I can still picture him clearly. Johnny, my childhood friend who used to come through the crawl space behind my closet. He wasn't like any other kid I knew. He wasn't a kid at all. Johnny was different. He had these piercing blue eyes that looked almost too sharp for his face, set deep in sunken sockets. His hair was greasy and matted, his hands always filthy, fingernails grown long and blackened at the tips. He smelled like sweat and wet leaves, like something that had been left outside for too long. But back then, I didn't care. Johnny was my friend, and when you're a lonely kid, that's all that really matters. Every time he came over, it started the same way. 3 knocks. From inside my closet. That was Johnny's signal. One summer afternoon in 2006, I heard it again. The 3 knocks echoed from the back of my closet door, and my heart jumped. I ran over, opened it, and there he was, smiling that crooked, toothless smile. I was so excited. I'd just gotten a new game, Pokemon Emerald, and I couldn't wait to show him. He crouched next to me, his long frame bending awkwardly as I explained how to catch Pokemon in battle trainers. Johnny listened like he actually cared. That was one of the things I liked about him. He always listened. For 30 minutes or so, everything was normal, just 2 friends hanging out. Then Johnny said, "Hey Joey, I found something today. I want to show you." He handed me a small, cheap-looking camera. It was scratched up and smelled faintly of dirt. "I found it at the park," he said proudly, grinning like he'd just discovered treasure. I didn't want to make him feel bad, so I said, "Cool, want to take a picture?" He nodded. I leaned close, and the flash went off, momentarily blinding me. He smiled again. "I'll get these developed. I'll give you one when I get them back." Then we heard footsteps coming down the hall, my mom's. Johnny's face went pale. Without saying another word, he crawled back into the closet, sliding the door shut just as my mom knocked and told me dinner was ready. I thought nothing of it then. I didn't think it was weird that a grown man had been hiding in my room. When you're a kid, the lines between imagination and danger aren't that clear. I didn't see Johnny again for about 10 days. When I finally heard those 3 knocks again, I practically sprinted to the closet. There he was, smiling as usual. "Hey Johnny," I said. "You promised we'd play Jenga last time. I've got it ready." Johnny nodded, but instead of going to the game, he reached into his pocket. "I got something for you, Joey." He handed me a small photograph, the one we'd taken. It was a little blurry, but I could see us both smiling. It made me happy. For a second, but then he said, "You can't show this to your mom. You have to keep it somewhere safe, okay? If she sees it, we'll both get in trouble." I didn't really understand, but I nodded anyway. He smiled, ruffled my hair, and said, "Good boy. Now let's play." After that, Johnny started coming more often. Almost every night, he'd knock 3 times, crawl out from my closet, and sit beside me while we played or talked. Sometimes we drew pictures. Sometimes he'd just sit there, staring at me while I played video games. I didn't think much of it. I was just happy to have a friend. Then, one night, everything changed. He stopped coming. A day passed, then 2, then a week. I waited every night for those 3 knocks, but they never came. After almost 2 weeks, I figured Johnny had just gotten bored of me. That hurt more than I expected. Then, one night, as I was reading a comic on my bed, I heard it. Only this time, it didn't sound like Johnny's usual knocks. They were quicker, sharper, almost frantic. I didn't care. I just thought, "He's back." I ran to the closet and flung the door open. Johnny stood there, but he didn't look like Johnny. His clothes were filthy, his face covered in scabs and grime. His eyes darted around the room like he was paranoid, like he expected someone to be watching. He wasn't smiling this time. My excitement drained instantly. "Johnny?" I asked quietly. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer at first. He just reached out and grabbed my wrist. His nails dug into my skin, hard enough to draw blood. "Joey," he whispered, "you need to come with me. There's something I have to show you." He pulled on my arm harder than I thought possible. "Johnny, stop. You're hurting me." But he didn't stop. His grip tightened. His eyes were wild now, veins crawling across them like spider webs. "You have to see this," he hissed. "They're going to get me soon." That's when I screamed. I heard my mom running down the hallway. Usually, Johnny would vanish at the sound of her footsteps, but not this time. He kept pulling, his filthy hand wrapped around my wrist like a vice. Then my mom burst into the room. She froze for a second, staring at the man dragging her son toward a dark closet, and then she lunged. She hit him, again and again, until he finally let go. She grabbed me and bolted out of the room, slamming her bedroom door and locking it behind us before calling the police. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of sirens and my mom crying. The police arrived fast. I remember the flashing red and blue lights filling our hallway, the blur of uniforms and radios. One officer gently asked me to stay in my mom's room while they cleared the house. I heard heavy footsteps, the sound of my closet door creaking open, and the low murmur of voices. Then, silence. Johnny didn't fight them. He didn't scream. They said he just sat there on the floor, whispering to himself while they put him in handcuffs. I didn't go near that room for days. When I finally did, the closet door was still open for the first time. I could see the back panel I'd never really paid attention to before. It wasn't a crawl space that led outside like Johnny had told me. It was a small, hidden storage room, just big enough for someone to live in. And apparently, he had. The smell hit me first, sour and earthy, like old garbage mixed with mildew. Inside, the police had left chalk marks and plastic bags. My mom told me later that they found a sleeping bag, wrappers, food containers, and something else. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Every single one was of me. Playing in the yard, walking home from school, sitting at the dinner table. Some were taken from behind bushes, others through windows. Some were taken from inside our house. I don't remember posing for any of them. I don't remember him being there. There was one more thing. They found a small notebook. Only one entry inside. Taped to the page was the photo Johnny had given me, the one of us smiling. Beneath it, written in messy handwriting, were the words, "Johnny and Joey, best friends forever." After that, everything changed. We moved out of the house within a month. Mom didn't talk about it again, and I didn't ask. We started over in another town, and for a while, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. I told myself Johnny was just some drifter, a weird guy who picked the wrong house to hide in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let him in, that I'd opened the door, smiled, and invited him into my life. For years, I had nightmares about those 3 knocks. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I could still smell that same earthy, rotten scent. I'd stare at my closet until morning, waiting for it to move, half expecting to see that crooked smile appear from the dark. Therapists said it was trauma, that my mind was replaying the moment my innocence broke. Maybe they were right, but sometimes I wonder if it's more than that. 19 years later, I still live with my mom, different house, different state. She's older now, forgetful. I try to take care of her the way she took care of me back then. I don't tell her that I still think about Johnny sometimes. I don't tell her that I still have nightmares. Last week, I was organizing boxes in the garage when I came across an old photo album. Dusty, untouched for years. I flipped through pictures of birthdays and Christmases, and then I froze. There it was. The photo. The one Johnny had given me. The one I'd hidden away. I don't know how it got there. I remember hiding it behind the dresser in my old room, not packing it, not bringing it with me. But there it was, taped neatly to a blank page. The edges were darker now, burned slightly, like someone had held a lighter too close. And scrawled underneath in that same messy handwriting were 4 new words. I found you again. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow felt wrong. At around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. 3 soft taps from inside my closet. I froze. My body wouldn't move, my throat too tight to scream. The sound came again, slower this time, like whatever was behind the door wanted me to know they were patient. I whispered to myself, it's just the house settling. Just pipes, wind, anything but that. But deep down, I knew that rhythm too well. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam of light shook as I aimed it toward the closet door. I swear I could see the faint outline of something, a shadow moving inside. I wanted to run, to leave the house, wake my mom, call the police, anything. But before I could move, a voice came through the door. Soft, scratchy, familiar. Joey, it's me. I dropped my phone. The light went out, and for a few seconds, the room was completely dark. When I finally built up the courage to turn the light back on, the door was slightly open. Just a few inches enough to see the sliver of darkness beyond it. There was nothing there. No one. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. I tried to laugh it off, but when I went to pick up my phone, I saw something on the screen. A new photo. It was blurry, taken from a low angle, like someone had been crouching in the dark. I was in bed, my eyes closed, and in the corner of the frame, half hidden in shadow, was a familiar smile. Crooked, toothless, Johnny's smile. When Laura and I signed the papers for the house, we felt like we'd won the lottery. It was a 1,950 seconds ranch in a quiet, established neighborhood, the kind of place where people actually mowed their lawns and waved. After years of noisy apartment life, it felt like finally achieving adulthood, a place where our future could be built in peace. The first few weeks were a blur of boxes, paint cans, and takeout dinners. Everything was normal, except for one thing: the house directly across the street. It was a mirror image of ours. Same footprint, same brick, same porch swing, but everything else was profoundly wrong. The windows were the first thing you noticed. Every single one of them was covered on the inside, not with curtains or blinds, but with layers of thick, silver duct tape. It didn't just cover the glass, it crisscrossed over the frames and bled onto the brick, looking less like a privacy measure and more like a wound that had been poorly stitched up. The siding was faded, the lawn was dead, and the whole structure looked like it was silently choking on dust and neglect. That's a project house, if I ever saw one, Laura had joked on our first night, sipping wine on the porch. It's not for sale, though, I replied, pointing to the mailbox. Someone lives there. Mr. Silas. He must be a vampire, she said, laughing a little too loud in the twilight. No lights, no car, no movement. That's how we first characterized Mr. Silas, the neighborhood enigma. The other neighbors, the normal ones, barely mentioned him. He keeps to himself. The old lady next door, Mrs. Henderson, had warned me gently. Been there since the 70s. You won't see him much. She was right. For the first 2 weeks, I never saw him. The house was a black hole of silence. Then, one Tuesday, I was moving a heavy toolbox from the driveway into the garage, my back to the street. I paused, catching my breath, and a deep, low feeling of being scrutinized washed over me. It wasn't the feeling of a friendly glance. It was the intense pinpoint focus of a predator. I turned slowly. Standing perfectly still on the porch of the house across the street was Mr. Silas. He was an older man, maybe mid-70s, rail thin, dressed in a muted gray cardigan and dark slacks, looking less like a neighbor and more like a figure from a photograph. But it wasn't his appearance that struck me. It was the way he was staring. His eyes, sunken and dark, weren't watching my house or the toolbox. They were locked on me. I managed a weak, friendly wave. "Hey, how's it going?" He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even acknowledge the greeting with a nod or a flicker of the lips. He simply held the stare, completely motionless, for what felt like 10 excruciating seconds. Then, without turning, he opened the front door, which made a dry, scraping sound, and slipped inside. The door shut instantly, plunging the porch back into shadow. It was such a strange, aggressively non-responsive interaction that I stood there, frozen, the toolbox suddenly feeling like a worthless piece of junk. It wasn't menacing, not in a traditional horror movie sense. It was just unnerving. It felt like I had been cataloged and dismissed. "Did you see the ghost of Christmas past?" Laura asked, walking out of the house. I shook my head, my mouth dry. I just met Mr. Silas. Or rather, I was observed by him. And he didn't say a word, just stared through me. She laughed it off. Maybe he's deaf, or maybe he just hates moving trucks. Don't worry about it. I tried not to. but the memory of that fixed, unwavering gaze stayed with me. It was the gaze of someone who wasn't seeing a new neighbor, but confirming the presence of a new data point. The unsettling interactions became less frequent but more specific. It started with small things. Our dog, Buddy, a gentle golden retriever, would refuse to go pee in the front yard after dark. He would pull desperately back toward the house, whining and trembling, his gaze fixed on the black taped windows across the street. This was a dog who chased squirrels and played fetch with a maniacal glee. He wasn't prone to anxiety. Then there was the static. Late one night, around 3 a.m., I was scrolling through my phone, unable to sleep. Laura was asleep beside me. I heard a faint, high-pitched shh that sounded like white noise or an untuned radio, extremely low volume, but persistent. I got up and walked around the house. It seemed to be coming from the front window. I crept to the window and listened, pressing my ear against the glass. The sound was clearly audible now, originating from across the street. It was a low, mechanical buzz, like cheap electronics, struggling to maintain a signal. It cut off abruptly as I watched the house. Maybe it was a refrigerator, I told myself, or a dryer. But it was 3 a.m., and the house looked like it hadn't had working appliances since the 1,980 seconds. The incident that really broke through Laura's skepticism happened 2 weeks later. We were hanging a large, framed map of the world in the living room, directly opposite the front windows. "Hold it steady, slightly higher," I instructed, steadying the level. Laura held the frame up, her concentration focused on the wall. As she adjusted, she gasped, "Noah, look." I looked out the window, nothing. At the house, the taped one. I squinted. The wall of silver tape, the oppressive darkness. But then I saw it. On the large picture window in the center of the house, where the tape was thickest and most overlapped, there was a single, perfect circle, a dime-sized section where the tape was missing. It looked like someone had used an X-Acto knife to surgically remove one small layer. Through that pinpoint, a needle-thin shaft of light was aimed, impossibly bright, directly at our living room. It wasn't the sun, because the sun was setting behind the house. It was artificial. It was clearly the beam of a camera or a long-range telescope, and it was pointed directly at where Laura was standing. The moment she pointed it out, the light vanished. It didn't turn off. It shifted sideways, disappearing into the darkness of the room. We stood there, the heavy map resting in our hands, staring at the small black hole in the silver tape. The light was gone, but the certainty was instant and chilling. That hole wasn't for letting light in, it was for letting observation out. "He's watching us," Laura whispered, her face pale. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a deep, cold fear. "He's watching what we're doing." I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. This wasn't just a weird hermit. This was an active, methodical observer. The realization wasn't just scary, it was violating. This peace we thought we had bought, this privacy, was an illusion. The house across the street wasn't abandoned. It was a blind, silent bunker, and we were its target practice. I didn't wave to Mr. Silas the next time I saw him. Instead, I stood on the porch with my camera phone, zooming in, trying to capture evidence of the tiny circle. I couldn't find it. The tape looked perfectly uniform now, as if the missing piece had been replaced perfectly. He knows I saw it, I thought. He's testing me. That night, as I lay awake, the faint, static shh was back, louder than before, coming from the black, taped monolith across the street. It felt like a recording, a constant, low-frequency reminder that somewhere in that dead silence, Mr. Silas was simply waiting, watching, and listening. The feeling of being watched intensified to a physical pressure. Laura and I stopped using the front living room entirely. We closed the curtains, even during the day, which made the house feel smaller and darker, but it was a small price to pay for the illusion of privacy. We had to do something more concrete. My solution was to fight observation with observation. I ordered a professional-grade set of security cameras and spent a frustrated Saturday installing them. They were pointed at our own property, naturally, but one high-definition camera was specifically positioned to capture a perfect view of Mr. Silas's porch and the taped front window. For 3 days, the footage was unremarkable. The house of taped windows was a monument to stillness. My adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a sense of foolishness. Maybe Laura was right to joke about paranoia. Maybe he was just an old man with a weird preference for duct tape and a very long lens. But on the fourth night, the camera caught something. I was scrubbing dishes after a late dinner when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. It was 11:47 p.m. The alert was from the front camera. I dried my hands and opened the live feed. The image was grainy, black and white. For a moment, it was just the empty porch across the street. Then, a dark shape detached itself from the shadows near the porch column. It was Mr. Silas, or at least a man matching his description. He wasn't standing or waving. He was crouched low, near the edge of his property line, moving with a disturbing, almost insect-like economy of motion. He had something in his hand, a dull metallic object that caught the porch light for a flash. He was meticulously laying it down, running it along the ground, just inches from the curb. It looked like a very thin, dark wire. He worked in total silence, his back to the camera. His movements were slow, deliberate, and utterly focused. He looked like a deep-sea creature tending to its line in the dark. After about 20 minutes of this unnerving activity, he stood up, dusted his hands, and vanished back into the shadows of his porch, sliding inside the silent house. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. A wire. My initial thought was that he was running a power line. But why in the middle of the night, and why with such secrecy? The next morning, armed with a fresh cup of coffee and a sinking feeling, I walked across the street to my own curb. The wire wasn't visible on the surface, but then I noticed a small anomaly, a tiny, almost invisible disturbance in the grass, as if someone had used a thin knife to lift and replace a 2-inch strip of turf. I crouched down and gingerly pushed the grass aside with a stick. There it was. A thin black wire, like a low-voltage audio cable, barely thicker than a piece of twine, was running just beneath the surface, following the curb. It crossed the street and disappeared exactly where Mr. Silas had been crouched, but it didn't stop there. I followed the line on my side of the street. It cut across the corner of our lawn, ran along the perimeter of our flower bed, and vanished into the undergrowth of a large, dense hedge that separated our property from the next house. It wasn't a power line, it was a listening line. A crude, but incredibly effective, hardwired microphone array, or maybe just a single mic, buried just close enough to pick up every conversation we had on our front porch, every shout at Buddy, every argument we had in the front rooms. When I showed Laura the footage and the physical evidence of the disturbed ground, she didn't cry or scream. She just looked sick. "He's recording us," she whispered, her hands shaking. "He has a recording of every private conversation we've had in this house." The worst confirmation came a few days later, late at night, after a particularly emotional conversation Laura and I had had on the porch, discussing whether we should sell the house and leave. We'd been speaking in low, frustrated voices. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I heard the static again. This time it wasn't a persistent shh. It was a clear, low-volume sound that I recognized immediately from the hours I'd spent setting up audio equipment. A recording being played back, heavily filtered and distorted, but absolutely audible. And then, a sound I knew instantly. My voice. It was a fragment, a barely intelligible murmur from our conversation hours earlier, played back through some cheap speaker across the street, muffled by the tape and the thick brick. It sounded like a phantom, whispering my own words back to me. A split second later, the sound cut out. He wasn't just recording. He was letting us know he was listening. He was enjoying the terror. The entire atmosphere of the house changed. Every sound we made became a source of anxiety. We were living in a performance, and the director was across the street, his audience of one in the dark. The final straw came a week later, on a cold Saturday morning. I was in the garage, getting ready to install blackout film on every single window on the front of our house. My final, desperate act of defiance. Buddy was with me, dozing near the open garage door. The sun was out. Everything felt safe and normal for a moment. I was whistling, stacking the film. Suddenly, Buddy's head snapped up. He wasn't barking. He was making a low, guttural whine, a sound of deep, instinctual terror. His eyes were wide and fixed on the street. I looked out. Mr. Silas's house. Nothing unusual, just the tape. I was about to dismiss it when I saw it. A small white square of paper, neatly folded, taped to the very center of the front window of his house. The square was the only piece of white on the entire grim facade. I walked closer, my heart in my throat. I couldn't read the text from my side of the street, but the way it was positioned, the meticulous symmetry, felt like a deliberate communication. Before I could cross the street, Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, appeared from her side. She looked at the paper, then at me, her old face etched with sorrow. "Don't go over there, Noah," she said, her voice barely a breath. "Leave him be." "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated, looking toward her own house as if Mr. Silas could hear her thoughts. "A list," she said finally. "He puts up a list sometimes, his observations." She then told me a story about the family who had lived in our house before us. A young couple. They had tried to confront Mr. Silas about his strange behavior. A week later, he had put up a very long list. On it, among mundane things like 7:35 a.m., male subject retrieved mail, were intimate details. 9:15 p.m., female subject wept in the kitchen for 4 minutes, 3 seconds. 10:02 p.m., argument about financial stress, mention of subject's father. She finished with a simple warning. "He knows everything about you. He'll keep writing it down until you move, or until he runs out of room." I looked at the small, white square. I didn't need to read it to know what was on it. It had our names on it. It had details of our life, our vulnerabilities, our emotional low points. He was archiving our existence, and the list was his table of contents. I walked back into my house, feeling colder than I ever had. We didn't even discuss it. We called the realtor that day. The house that was supposed to be our future was now a cage, and the jailer was across the street. We sold the house 3 months later, taking a significant loss just to escape the atmosphere of psychological suffocation. We never spoke to Mr. Silas again, and he never spoke to us. He just watched, a silent, taped window presence. The persistent fear is this. I still occasionally drive by that street. Years later, the house is sold. A new, young family lives there now, with bright curtains and a basketball hoop. And the house across the street? The windows are still covered in thick, silver duct tape. But now, next to the small, empty hole in the central window tape, there's a brand new, fresh piece of white paper, neatly folded. I can't read it, but I know it's there. And every time my phone acts up, or a conversation with Laura feels a little too exposed, I can almost hear the faint, low-volume shh of the static, reminding me that some people don't just watch your life, they collect it, and they catalog it, and they wait for the moment to use it. We bought the house in late October, a small fixer-upper in a quiet suburb that looked like it hadn't changed since the 72nds. My fiancée, Laura, and I were thrilled. After years in a cramped apartment, we finally had a front lawn, a driveway, and neighbors who waved as they trimmed hedges. It felt safe until I met Mr. Silas. He lived right next door. Late 70s, thin as a rail, with sharp gray eyes that never blinked enough. He dressed the same every day. Khaki pants, light blue button-down, tucked perfectly into a belt that probably hadn't loosened in decades. His lawn looked like a golf course, every blade of grass cut to military precision. The first time I met him, I was carrying a heavy box up the steps when he appeared at the property line, holding a carpenter's level. "That railing's uneven," he said, not even looking at me. "You should fix that before winter." Quote. I laughed awkwardly, said thanks. But he was already walking back up his perfect stone path. That was it. No smile, no small talk, just an evaluation. At first I thought he was just old-fashioned, but over the next few weeks, I noticed he was always there. If I went to the garage, he'd be sitting on his porch, reading the paper. If Laura watered the flowers, he'd be trimming his roses always at the same distance from our property line. He never said a word, never waved, just watched. Laura thought I was overreacting. "He's harmless," she'd laugh. "Probably just bored. You're the new toy on the block." I wanted to believe her, until the measuring started. It was a Saturday morning. I was fixing a loose flagstone when I heard a faint clink. Mr. Silas was standing near the curb, stretching a silver tape measure from his driveway to our mailbox. He jotted something in a small leather notebook. "Everything all right?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "Defining boundaries," he said. "People get sloppy, lines blur. I'm making sure everything is right. The way he said right made my stomach tighten. It wasn't about property lines anymore. It was about control. From then on, little things started happening. Notes appeared typed on pristine index cards in perfect handwriting. One was taped to our recycling bin. Collection day is Wednesday. Placement before 6 p.m. Tuesday violates Ordinance Section 4.2. Please adjust accordingly. M. No signature, but I didn't need one. Another day, he rearranged our pile of tree branches after a storm, trimming them to exactly 4 feet each. They won't take them otherwise, he said without emotion. I tried to ignore it, but soon it became impossible. His obsession turned personal. One night, around 11 p.m., I took the dog out. As I passed our kitchen window, the one facing his yard, I noticed something wedged into the frame. A small, dark river stone. I pulled it out and saw a folded piece of paper taped underneath. 2 lines, written in the same perfect script. 10:17 p.m. dinner was Chinese takeout, Szechuan. 10:45 p.m. Argument re. Paint color. Elevated voices. He had been outside our window, listening, recording. My hands shook as I showed Laura. She went pale. He was right there, Noah. He heard us. We locked every window, every door, but it didn't help. The house didn't feel safe anymore. It felt transparent. I tried to confront him the next morning. He was watering his roses, calm as ever. I found your note, I said, holding the paper. He didn't even blink. Ah, yes. The assessment card, he said. A relationship under duress creates noise pollution. I keep a log of neighborhood pollutants. Yours are consistent. He said it like a scientist describing lab rats. I told him to stop. He smiled faintly. I don't watch you, Noah. I watch the space. And the space you occupy is irregular. I can't stop until the metrics align. The following week, the trash cans moved by themselves, placed exactly 23 feet from the back door. Every morning, we'd move them back, and the next day, they'd return to 23 feet again. Then our mail started arriving, with notes scribbled in the corners. Turbito centimeter teron corner. 15 Stilton package. He was measuring everything, every imperfection. The breaking point came one afternoon while Laura was at work. I was cutting baseboard for the living room, muttering curses when the fit was off. I left for 5 minutes to grab coffee. When I came back, there was a small antique wooden ruler resting on the wood, taped with another note. The length required is 17.5 inches. Your estimate was 18.2. Please measure twice. I froze. The doors were locked, the windows shut, no sign of entry. He had been inside. I called Laura, panicked. She told me to call the police. They came, checked the locks, and told me there was no crime. Just an eccentric old man. Install cameras, they said. They didn't understand this wasn't just trespassing. It was psychological warfare. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like a measuring tape being pulled. Every gust of wind felt like someone standing too close. At 3 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped outside, flashlight in hand, and headed to his backyard. He had a shed, small, windowless. The padlock was hanging loose, almost like an invitation. Inside smelled of dust and metal. I turned on my phone's light and froze. It wasn't a garden shed. It was a workshop filled with shelves of labeled boxes and ledgers. 1,987, the Henderson years. 2002, the single mother's irregularity. And in the center, massive blueprints of our house, covered in precise notes and dotted lines. On the desk lay an open ledger titled 107 Willow Creek Lane, The Noah and Laura Irregularity, Volume 1. Every page documented our lives, arguments, meals, even what time we took the dog out. And then I saw it. A pencil sketch of me, head bowed, measuring wood. Beneath it, the caption, "The subject's eyes lack focus. Measurement requires precision of eye, hand, and mind. He has failed all 3 metrics." A soft click came from behind me. I froze when I heard the click behind me. The shed door didn't open at first, but the faint glow from outside shifted, and I knew someone was standing there. "You've come to see the books, Noah." Mr. Silas's voice drifted through the dark like cold smoke, calm, polite, completely devoid of surprise. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't angry. He sounded almost satisfied. "You'll find Volume 1 is quite comprehensive," he said. "The data is indisputable. You and Laura are operating at an unacceptable variance." I turned slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught his figure, tall, rigid, backlit by moonlight. And in his hand, something glinted silver. For a second, I thought it was a knife. Then I saw the truth. It was a tape measure. A long, 20-foot steel tape measure. He stepped forward, the metal tip dangling loosely, catching the light as it unspooled with a slow whir. "The alignment must be corrected," he murmured. That sound, the slow, deliberate click-clink of the tape being pulled, was the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. Not because of what he could do with it, but because of what it meant to him. This wasn't a weapon. It was an instrument of judgment. I didn't wait. I lunged past him, shoulder first, knocking him off balance. The flashlight flew out of my hand as I bolted out of the shed. My feet tore across the manicured lawn, every breath ragged in the freezing night air. Behind me, I heard it whir clink, the sound of the tape retracting, over and over, as if he were still measuring the air between us. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door shut and locking it 3 times. Laura came running out of the bedroom, terrified, asking what happened. I couldn't get the words out at first. When I finally did, they came out in gasps. "He has blueprints of the house. He's been recording everything. He's insane, Laura. He was there in the shed," he said. "We're irregular." We didn't stay another night. Before sunrise, we packed what we could fit in the car and drove to a motel an hour away. Laura cried the whole way. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The next morning, I called the police again. This time, I demanded they search his property. They said they would look into it. I never got a follow-up call. When I drove past the house a few days later, his lawn was still perfect. His curtains still drawn, as if nothing had happened. We put the house up for sale, as is. A real estate agent handled everything. We never went back inside. Months passed. We tried to move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being measured. I started double-checking the angles of picture frames, making sure the rug was aligned perfectly with the couch. I told myself it was stress, that I was just being cautious. But sometimes, when I worked late, I'd hear it again in the silence of my new office, that faint click-clink sound in the back of my head. Laura noticed, too. "You're doing it again," she said one night. "Doing what?" "Measuring things. The desk, the door frame, the coffee table." I hadn't even realized it. The tape measure was in my hand. That's when I understood. Silas hadn't just watched us. He'd infected me. A year later, we got a letter from the real estate company. The house had been resold. The new owners, a young couple, were thrilled with the neighborhood. But attached to the letter was something odd, a small envelope addressed to me, with no return address. Inside was a single, neatly folded piece of paper, typewritten in that same perfect font. 107 Willow Creek Lane. The irregularity resolved. Alignment restored. Variance corrected. No signature. No explanation. Laura told me to burn it. I did. But even as the paper curled into ash, I noticed something. The edges weren't straight. They were off by a fraction of an inch. And for some reason, that bothered me. Weeks later, I was working late again. The house was quiet. Laura was asleep. I was fixing a small picture frame that hung slightly crooked on my office wall. I lifted it, adjusted it once, twice, then froze. The frame had been perfectly level. But when I stepped back, I noticed something impossible. On the lower corner of the frame, pressed faintly into the paint, was a thin, precise indentation, a measurement line. Someone had marked the wall. I turned, pulse hammering, scanning the dark room. My phone buzzed on the desk, a notification from my home security app. Motion detected. Backyard. I clicked the feed. The screen flickered, showing the back patio. The camera was shaking slightly, the motion sensor still detecting movement. Then the image steadied. Standing just at the edge of the porch light was an old man in a blue button-down, holding something long and metallic in one hand. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking up at my office window. The feed froze on his face for half a second before cutting to static. That was 2 months ago. The police came again, reviewed the footage, and told me it was probably a glitch. They said no one could have been there. Our backyard was surrounded by a 6-foot fence. Laura wants to move again. I told her we will, but I haven't started packing. I can't, because last night I found something on the kitchen counter. A small, smooth river stone. There was a folded slip of paper taped underneath. 11:03 p.m. Subject observed adjusting picture frame. 11:06 p.m. Frame corrected. Alignment achieved. I threw the stone in the trash, locked every door, and sat awake till sunrise, waiting for the sound of that tape measure again. It never came. But this morning, as I left for work, I noticed something new. A small white index card tucked neatly under the windshield wiper of my car. On it, in perfect, clean handwriting, measurement complete.